All right, guys, put on your seatbelts. It's going to be a wild one. The Phoenix process is a term that I came up with 15 years ago or so to describe the process that I went through. And one of the caveats I want to give is it has nothing to do with any of the other Phoenix process, the books and their programs. It's actually a very common name. This has nothing to do with any of that, although it's very similar. And an interesting story that I'm going to relate, actually, is that somebody that was a huge inspiration, probably the single biggest inspiration on my life after this happened to me, I found an obscure article in a book called Magical Lens, or a periodical, a magazine, an interview with Jerry Garcia, where he described the process down to the smallest detail, and he, at the end, said, I came to call it my Phoenix process. So basically, the idea is that there are macro and micro movements in the world, and that if you are aligned and attenuated with certain processes, particularly those that, Chubby, hold on. I knew it. Sorry, guys. Reaper crashed right before I started. So I got to just go in here and change the thumer bobbies. Nope, that one's fine. There's the problem. That should fix it. Apologize for that. So if you're aligned with these processes, you are going to experience a reflection of what's happening in the macro scale. And I'm actually a little bit embarrassed that I didn't see the chaos that was going to come into my own life based on seeing it happen in the world at large, right? If we are microcosms of that macrocosm, and we recognize there's a massive change occurring on this planet, and in order for a new order to emerge, there must be chaos, we can anticipate experiencing that chaos in our own world in micro. And so basically, it's a little bit difficult for me to figure out where to start with this, to give you guys the proper context. But the original Phoenix process for me was a period where I was having tremendous revelations on almost a daily basis. I was hearing voices that I never really decided were of an external source, that it was a spirit or a demon or my own subconscious. Synchronicities went off the charts in a way that was absolutely ridiculous. Precognition started to occur. My focus was guided to specific authors and books, and in such a way that it was pretty much impossible to deny that something was deliberately guiding my attention from point A to point B. Some of these would be sort of accentuated with experiences that would also lend something to the narrative that was forming. So there was an incredible amount of conceptual continuity woven through these synchronicities. It's not like they were just a bunch of meaningful coincidences happening in aggregate. They were all connected, they were all in sequence, and so it really set the tone for the rest of my life. And the consequences of it were almost equal good and bad, because I was not properly prepared. I still had self-destructive tendencies. I had not integrated my shadow. I had not yet had ayahuasca. There was too much enthusiasm that wasn't tempered by wisdom. So I made a tremendous number of mistakes, and I blew a lot of massive opportunities. One of the conditions, or almost symptoms of this process was that my ability to apparently manifest things with a high degree of specificity and very rapidly, that was part of it, but I had not dealt with my shadow, built up my self-confidence. I had not earned the wisdom that I needed to make investitures, to build things that actually lasted, despite this apparently, I don't want to say godlike, but, in a sense, that's kind of what it was like. Like, I had sort of become God of my own world, but I was still in the modality of the fool, right? And the difference between the fool and the magus is that the fool destroys everything he creates almost immediately. Now, and I will get a little bit more into the stories, but I want to set the tone and give the context to catch us up to the present moment. So, I don't want to give the impression this ever stopped. It didn't, but the intensity of it waned over time, right? It never left me, but it did sort of dissipate. And I guess a couple of months ago, I told my partner, based on certain experiences that I'd had, that I was anticipating the Phoenix process was coming back around. And, everything in our life in micro is really a product of repetitive patterns, right? The Fibonacci sequence, like, we know that it creates galaxies and that it creates seashells, but it doesn't stop there. It expresses through time and across history and in every conceivable way, because what it really is an expression of the fact that all of the laws of creation are exerting themselves in exactly the same way on every level of the phenomenology of the universe. And so, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I told her that, it's coming back around, and I think it's going to be more intense this time. And sure enough, over the last few weeks, I guess, the synchronicities in my precognition and intuition, the opportunities, the sort of manifesting capacity has exploded. And I'll give you guys just a couple of examples that border on too much information because they're, kind of personal, but I did get my partner's permission to share this stuff. So just the other day, we went out to eat, and I needed to get money, which shouldn't have been a problem, but my phone started glitching, and I couldn't keep it on for more than 3 seconds, so I couldn't send us money, and that was a problem. So we got the bill, and it was exactly 111, which is a very significant number for me and for all of us, really. And so when she saw the bill, she said, well, that must be a good sign. And at that moment, my phone just came on and stopped glitching, hasn't done it since. So that was odd. But then we went down to a club down the street, and we were watching this band, and they're singing all Spanish, rock music. And we have just reconciled, right? So I made some sort of provocative comment, and she said, after 5 or 6 days, I don't know if I can handle any more intimacy. And I made a joke that was a direct reference to the Red Hot Chili Peppers song, You're Gonna Have to Take It on the Other Side, right? So I pay the bill, we stand up, and the band goes in to Take It on the Other Side by the Red Hot Chili Peppers in perfect English. And so, that was all interesting. But then we had a San Pedro ceremony scheduled for Saturday, this last Saturday. I had no knowledge that there was going to be a massive solar storm. Now we have to rewind back to the original Phoenix process. One of the most extraordinary things that happened during that period was this day where I was sitting around minding my own business, and this voice said to me, you need to go out and do a ritual of adoration to the sun. And at this time, I had not really practiced magic. I had read about all these different traditions for decades. I had studied and taken a lot of psychedelics, not ayahuasca, had not yet studied shamanism, had not yet taken initiation in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn or the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. So, I wasn't really even sure if I believed in magic in any sense, much less, going out and doing like adoration rituals to the sun. But this voice had demonstrated preternatural knowledge to me consistently. Nothing it had told me to do had been harmful, and it had all proven correct, and on extraordinary levels, right? So I thought, I got nothing better to do than to play along. So I'm living in this valley in Durango, Colorado. It was an incredible place, waterfalls, and the Anasazi had lived there. There was a cave down the street that had like spiral artwork and all this stuff in it. There were arrowheads all over the place. It was gorgeous. So I start walking out to the field because I know there's this big flat rock, and I can sit facing the sun as it drops behind the mesa, right behind that Anasazi cave with the spirals in it. So I start walking, and then I think, this is stupid. I've lost my mind. I need to go home and make some coffee and read a book. And I go to pivot on my foot, and my phone beeps. And I knew before I opened it, this is this thing. And I flip the phone open, and it says, "You and your brothers will echo this gospel to the four corners of the globe, and yet the sun shines on." The sun shines on was obviously a reference to the fact that this was a solar ritual, and the sun was about to sink behind the mesa. So I had a limited amount of time. So I said, all right, fine. I go out to the field, sit on the rock. The voice says, "Raise the energy." And I'm like, what does that even mean? And it's basically said something like, "Why are you playing stupid? Just do it." And so I sit and I focus on raising the energy, and I hear all the rattlesnakes in the field instantly start rattling. And it hit me that this is real. Something is happening. So then, once I could recover from my shock, I said, okay, what do I do next? And the voice said, "Remember how you figured out that there's a veil between worlds, and that it's kind of like a Fourier transform that converts the conceptual to the actual, and there's a process of reversal similar to a reflection in a mirror?" And I was like, yeah. And it said, okay, so what's your name backwards? My name is Harley. So I thought, Yel-Ra? Supposed to be, sun ritual. And that was another instance of like, it's difficult for me to imagine that I could have just generated that on my own in that moment. So I'm staring at the sun without any, discomfort, and I see these purple tendrils kind of flashing out of it all around it. And I knew they were real. So I do this for a little while, and then I walk home, and there's this little detour going to my house. And remember that the sun god in the Egyptian tradition is a twin god, right? And there are these two, maybe like 4 or 5-year-old twin girls. And their father walks up to me, and he has like frizzy, he's probably Argentinian or something, and his hair kind of stands up a little bit when he gets close to me. And his daughters start running around me in circles, alternately growling and laughing, which it's difficult to communicate, but the energy, it was like unbelievably perfect. And somehow it didn't bother this man at all. He just said, "They were really enjoying you." And so, I go home, and there's nothing really of consequence that happened until the next day. I'm driving to work. I go into the gas station, and I see the newspaper says biggest solar storm in maybe 26,000 years. I'm not saying I caused that. I want to be clear about that. But obviously, whatever it was that I was communicating with did know that. And so the point that I'm making here is that this correlation with these internal processes and these macro processes, the fact that I predicted a repeat of the Phoenix process, all these crazy synchronicities start happening. The chaos in my life disappears and starts to congeal into something consistent with what I would manifest. And then there's an even bigger solar storm than last time. So not only that, I had planned to do this San Pedro ritual on that day, which happened to be May 11th. 11 is the number of magical expansion. And Saturn is the teacher. So it hit me that because San Pedro is a medicine of the light, one of the most common visions that people have at high doses of San Pedro involves being able to see like trillions and trillions of something like photons that represent individual units of consciousness, monads, almost like the soul. And it's a dialogue with the light. Like a lot of San Pedro shamans will tell you that it's really a conversation directly with the light. So to be high up in the Andes and drink San Pedro during the biggest solar storm in, however long, it didn't happen, which was a major oversight. But again, I'm just sharing that because the indications that this is actually repeating are very, very strong. And I'm not going to get into all of them because it's not necessary. But it is tremendously important because it's obviously something that's happening on a global level, right? There are major, major, major threats to the old paradigm. The old Bronze Age religions are dying. And if they're not dying, it's because fear is being fostered in order to maintain that control mechanism, which is all it is and all it has ever been. This is why they are the old observations of astrology and the knowledge of the cycles, the energetic cycles and the patterns in consciousness and in nature that are real sources of power, because a true shaman, a true magician, does not look to override, overrule, or work around the laws of nature. He learns to use them in order to transcend them in a sense, right? So the overseers, knowing that there is this huge movement in consciousness that is actually a fundamental expression of the universe, right? It's not like it's just something that's happening on a surface level, like a historical or sociological movement. It is a phase of our existence. And so they are dividing us. They're pitting us against each other. They are putting pressure on people to maintain the old paradigms, because even science at this point, people like Michael Levin, are proving that a lot of the main foundational constituents of the matrix paradigm are not correct. The slime mold, right, single cell organism that out-engineered the best Japanese engineers with the best computers. I think most people, when they hear about that, it doesn't really hit them the magnitude of what is being suggested by this, right? And then we have the sentience of plants that has been confirmed, that Mimosa pudica can count on 2 separate number lines. Or no, excuse me, that's the Venus flytrap. Mimosa pudica has a memory because it responds to touch, but if you touch one without damaging it every day for a few days, it'll stop closing because it remembers. They recognize family members. They feel pain. They can tell what color shirt you're wearing. They have no neurons, all right? Even DNA, this almost all-powerful influence, it's almost God in the modern paradigm, in a sense, right? Michael Levin has proven that by manipulating the field, you can change the progeny of these worms, for example, so they grow 2 heads, even their offspring, without changing the genome. So, and not to mention that there was a doctor that went to get a brain scan because he was having persistent headaches. He has no brain. And we're not talking about, like, there's a mathematical genius that only has 5%. This guy only had a sack of fluid at the end of his spine. He's a doctor. So the whole entire premise of consciousness having a basis in neurons has been completely destroyed, legitimately. And so, and that's not the only thing. I mean, you have physicists like Penrose, who they're not just theorizing. They have watched organic matter out in the universe configure itself in a way that is so sophisticated, it basically proves that consciousness preceded the organization of matter, right? And then if you couple that with the fact that so many of these ancient traditions, before they were contaminated, before they were corrupted, before they were intentionally mistranslated, they insinuated, implied, or directly described a thought catalyzing the organization of the primordial stew into order and symmetry and giving rise to the universe. So we are at a precipice where the old paradigm is dying. And the battle between the old guard and the new paradigm could be terminal for us. It really could. And so that kind of bestows on us a sort of urgent responsibility to organize, formulate, define, create our microcosm in such a way that we live by example to a degree that gets the attention of other people. This is one of the most powerful tools that we have, because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but trying to talk to people, to change their political views, to change their religious views, it's a fool's errand. But if you can live in a way that makes them jealous almost, and I know that sounds like an egoic way to put it, but we have to think about human psychology and the inevitability of these processes and how they have to happen. We have to lead by demonstration. The other thing that we have to do is remember that success is our proof. So we must demonstrate that consciousness has capacities that the old paradigm was wrong to deny. And so our practice of psychedelic plants and other medicines, ritual magic, meditation, diet, whatever it is, we have to avail ourselves now of every tool and every protective protocol and all the wisdom of the ancestors that has been left to us in order to pull ourselves into an absolutely focused force. Thought is a force. Will is a force. And we must apply these forces. And we have to remember that part of the efficacy of this new level of communication is going to be based on speaking their language. So it's extremely important for all of us to also avail ourselves of the availability of knowledge on a scale that we've never had before. While it's true that AI could be our enemy, right now, you can learn to prompt it to condense and consolidate entire disciplines into almost like footnotes. And you can compress and consolidate it to the most vital bits and then integrate that rapidly. And in this way, not only do you increase your ability to communicate with the muggles and normies and worse, but you also develop certainty instead of faith. For example, people oftentimes in my secret streams and in these live streams point out that we're up against people that can control the flow of information. They have control of the militaries. They have control of the cops in prisons. They're flooding the waters with poisons. They're, according to some misinformation people, they're even making dangerous medicines. I don't know why anyone would say that. I mean, it couldn't possibly be true, but you guys know what I mean. How do we fight against that? And aside from what I just explained, the law of entrainment, right? Anything that cycles, anything that pulses, which is everything in the universe, entrains with the higher cycle. So as we do our personal private work to elevate ourselves, the rest of the mass of human consciousness has no choice but to rise up with us. And there are other elements of this, but it's important to remember that's not a spiritual idea. That's scientific fact. So there are all sorts of tremendous developments that are extremely encouraging, and that if you're really able to read between the lines, will help you to understand that we're not at as much of a disadvantage as it seems ostensibly or superficially. Let me check in with the chat and see. Yeah, I got your message about that, Dionysus. That's pretty wild. Okay, so also let me share this story with you guys because I think it's important for me not to just make claims and statements, but to give you guys observable examples of this sort of thing. Excuse me. Because, I'm suggesting that this is going to be a very common experience right now, right? And I just want to give you an idea of how specific this is. In the Western mystery tradition, we have names for all of the phases of this process because pretty much everyone goes through it exactly the same way. The details are a little bit different because we all have some sort of purpose. But there's some kind of psychological, emotional, or spiritual crisis, and that's necessary to create the space in the consciousness in order to allow the reconfiguration in a new form. There's the dark night of the soul, the crossing of the abyss, the dweller on the threshold phase. It's very consistent. But this really blew my mind. The Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia, huge influence on me, right? So I go through this process, and one of the, aspects of it that I described to people was that this voice that would guide me to do all these things, it was not nice. It was kind of like a Dutch uncle. It was sort of mean, and I described its laughter as this hollow, awful laughter, right? And that's important because a few years later, or maybe the next year, bearing in mind that I had deliberately tried to read every interview with Jerry Garcia that ever existed, and I was of the opinion that I had done that, right? So another detail of this is that magic with a K was also a really important element of this process for me. And so I don't know how this happened, but I was just, on my phone, and I found this interview with Jerry Garcia I had never read before in a magazine called Magical Blend with a K. And if you consider the fact that even the title of the magazine related to the Phoenix process, and then I start reading, and Garcia says, when I was about 31 years old, which is exactly the age that I was, 3 and 1 is the number of initiation. Yeah, it was mostly audible in my thoughts. So I read this article, and he said, when I was about 31 years old, I had this experience where there was this voice that was guiding me and teaching me, and leading me through all of these lessons and et cetera, exactly my experience. And he said it had this hollow, mocking laughter. I called it hollow, awful laughter. So it was like almost exactly the same description. And then he said, later, I came to call it my Phoenix process. And my head almost exploded. Here's my idol describing this identical experience and even giving it the same name, So I just wanted to offer that in case you guys are wondering why I'm so convinced that this process happens to everyone that is aligned with this force. And another reason I'm doing this stream, it's probably going to turn into a series because there's no way that I can talk about all this tonight. By the way, if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. So where was I at with this? One of the reasons I made this channel and that I do what I do in my life in general is that I don't want to see other people go through this process and miss as many opportunities as I did. So, there are certain things I might be able to offer that will make this smoother and easier for all of you. The issue, though, is that oftentimes when this process engages, there's ego inflation, as was definitely the case with me. And it can become really, really difficult to communicate with people that are going through this. They're not really going to listen to anyone. They're convinced that they know exactly, what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. And it can be pretty catastrophic, The primary thing, there's two aspects of this, but the primary thing is that you have to go through whatever you need to go through to get your shadow shit done. You have to build your discipline and willpower. The most complete set of talents and virtues is totally useless in the absence of discipline and willpower. So you cannot hesitate, you cannot delay, you cannot make excuses. You absolutely have to develop a good mindfulness practice. You have to learn to psychoanalyze yourself. And one of the reasons that you have to do it yourself is that your subjective experience can color the symbols, the metaphors, the information that's bubbling up from the subconscious. In a lot of cases, without a tremendous amount of context, nobody can really give you an accurate analysis of these things but you. So keeping a dream journal every single day where you wake up and write down all of your experience from your dreams immediately before they fade, and also to actually take the time to record all of the synchronicities and any other kind of experiences that seem relevant, to actually make a written record of it so that there is no question. And so that when your wisdom increases down the road, you're able to look back as well and see what there is that your level of wisdom and ability could not elucidate for you when it first occurred. I've had things that were 10 years old that I wrote down that, if I hadn't written them down, they would have been lost. That confirmed absolutely things like precognition. Another aspect of it is that you must get control of your emotional body as completely as possible. And also your objectivity. Because as you build a bridge between the subconscious and conscious mind, which is actually the trigger or the facilitator of synchronicities, according to Jung and according to my own ideas about how they are really manifested because of a higher order of symmetry that permeates everything. You will start to have precognitions. But without skill, right? Without, for example, in shamanism or in the Western mystery tradition, which is actually also a shamanic tradition, there is a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is not there to maintain control necessarily, at least in the white hat versions of this. It's there so that there is someone that can see and confirm that you are actually at the level you think you are. In this sort of pop culture paradigm, we have all these people that just decide they can channel, that decide they're psychic, that decide that they're shamans or magicians. And there's no one to test them. There's no one to confirm for them. And there's also no one to offer wisdom in many cases to help them determine what is a wish demon, which is you believe it's a precognition, but it's just your desires, right, and your will. And then also, once you, this was a terrible problem for me, once you have manifested a few things that you are absolutely certain you generated, it's almost 100% certain that you will overestimate your ability to do that. And if you pursue anything with this false sense of confidence that puts you in jeopardy, you're going to be in some trouble. And I think it's even more important during this phase of this process that, one of the mistakes I made is that I had no concern for the material world. I walked away from my home, everything I owned. I was not, the least bit concerned with the material world and maintaining a balance there. And now that I'm older and wiser, I realize that it's absolutely essential that those of us that are acquiring spiritual power also have worldly power, right? Some of the circumstances in this world are dictated to us and not by us. And one of those is that money is power. And historically, we've had this condition where people that pursue spirit are not interested in power. People that pursue power have no interest in spirit. And I'm sure you guys can very clearly understand why that does not work. So this is another thing that we have to really guard against, to make sure that at all times we're balancing the pentagram, that we are grounded, that we are connected to reality just as much as we are connected to potentials and possibilities, and that we don't become drunk on our own power. Another serious issue that confronts probably all of us is that all advanced spiritual people or artists that I have ever encountered or am aware of were severely traumatized at one point. And I sort of explain this, that we have a hole in the soul where the light comes through. Another way to think about it, as Terence McKenna put it, was that the shaman is a madman who has cured himself. And this means that, or implies that the reason he is a shaman is because he has put himself back together and therefore knows how to do it for other people. So there's a pragmatic reason for this condition, It's not just some random circumstance, and it is a blessing as much as it is a curse, depending on the skill and determination of the individual that's undergoing the process, right? So what I'm getting at there is that most of us have a predisposition to ego inflation because we have damaged self-esteem, right? We also are coming from a very toxic culture, and so there are so many different reasons why we are kind of inclined to sort of become drunk on power. And it sort of even can be medicine in a sense, because, it does something to correct and heal the self-esteem problems and self-confidence. At the same time, it's very, very easy for this to become destructive. And it's a very difficult thing to even give people advice about, because the only thing you can really do is have awareness of it now and develop a mindfulness practice so you're constantly observing your mental processes, constantly analyzing, constantly being aware of the motivations that exert themselves in your life, particularly when you can trace those back to their cause. Because oftentimes, even recognizing the impetus for a trauma can neutralize it. So this is a tremendous thing. It's absolutely true that it takes a tremendous amount of responsibility to wield power. And I think a lot of people really underestimate what plant medicine can do, what ritual magic can do. And if you combine all these things and you have multiple catalysts that are all propelling you, you have to take even more precaution to streamline and direct that energy. Otherwise, it just goes everywhere and creates a cyclone of mixed effects. Just checking in with the chat. So, having said that, another really important protection that you can utilize is that your success is your proof. Don't allow yourself to just believe that you have developed abilities, because you've experienced one thing. I actually took this personally to a really high level of improbability in order to test it. I did quite a few things. But one of the wildest was that I knew that Danny Carey, the drummer from Tool, was into the same sort of occult lineage that I was. And I also reasoned that because he was a millionaire and famous, he had access to all kinds of doors that were closed to me. And it would be really good to talk to him. And also, I could tell all my friends I was going to do it and demonstrate that we have this capacity of consciousness that sort of supersedes what people generally acknowledge, right? So I told my friends I'm going to go talk to Danny Carey from Tool. I did not look him up and see where he was going to be on the internet or anything. I just got in my car. My girlfriend, I was going to leave her at home, but she spider monkeyed me and like clung to my leg, and I had to drag her to the car. And speaking of the influence of a higher power, or I almost don't like to phrase it that way, because I think it's really important to try to avoid old paradigm ideas and terms. You know, I tend to think of the consciousness of the creator as being sort of just integrated into the framework of the whole thing, rather than some like ruler overseeing the barracks, you know. But so I just drove to Vegas, or I drove to California. We got stuck in Vegas, and on the third day, we just suddenly sold all these crystals I had in the trunk that I'd collected in the mountains in Colorado, gems and stuff that I had. And we got the gas money to get to LA. And my friend, who had been involved with Maynard, believe it or not, she went to a Pussifer concert and he noticed her. And so she had kind of a connection to them. She called me and she said, "You're sure as shit gonna talk to Danny tonight." And I was like, "Why?" And she's like, "Where are you?" I gave her my location, and she said, "Yeah, you're about 2 blocks from this open mic where he's going to play." So I did actually have someone give me a bit of information right at the very end, but I was 2 blocks away. So we went over to the Baked Potato, parked our car behind it. The owner comes out immediately and says, "Danny Carey is going to be here tonight." And I was like, "This is real. What the fuck?" You know? So I had to move the car to this little side parking lot, and I took my little microcube out, actually the same one that's sitting right there on the floor somehow. And he walked by and looked at us. I started playing 46 and 2, which is horrendously embarrassing to look back on. But then I went around to the front to go in, and there was a $15 cover charge. I stuck my hand in my pocket. I had $15.00. So I paid the entrance, went in, and he did his little set with his. It wasn't really an open. I mean, it was an open mic, but there was a band of like real, like Frank Zappa's keyboard player, Danny Carey, people like that that were opening this event. I actually later determined that he does this quite often. He hangs out there a lot. So then I'm leaving, and I see him putting his snare drum in his minivan, which was weird. I was expecting a Lambo or whatever. And I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, can I kind of talk to you, but like away from everyone?" Which, if you guys know Tool, they have a lot of like crazy people that follow them around. Maybe I was one of them at this point. But I just wanted to ask him one question, mostly though, just to prove that I could do this. And he agreed, and we went out in the alley and had a brief conversation, and then I went back to Colorado. So what I'm getting at here is that if you think that you have become a person that has access to this kind of cognitive capacity, test it, and test it thoroughly. And then when you actually do have precognitions and you have, you think you've manifested something, pay attention to the times that you fail, because that's another thing that I did that made me overconfident. In those times that I failed, I would just kind of write them off or ignore it without using those experiences to temper and balance my perception of what was happening, right? Because I wasn't wrong, and it still happens to this day. But, for a lot of reasons, it caused a lot of overconfidence, and that ultimately derailed my entire life, much less just the process. So, I say this so much, I almost don't want to repeat it again, but The lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, I have instruction on my channel. There's lots of good instruction out there. It is the most useful tool in your bag to help you to organize, manage, define, ground. There are several aspects of the ritual that are designed specifically to create stability in the process for you. In fact, towards the end of this, after the chaos had subsided and the dust had started to settle, I almost immediately took initiation in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and thankfully, one of the things that you have to do for the first year as a probationer is the lesser banishing ritual twice a day for a year. And as soon as I started to do that, this tendency to be out of balance and to create all this chaos started to vaporize. So it is tremendously important and tremendously efficacious, highly recommended. Psychedelics, of course, a lot of people ask about whether it is actually safe and advisable to mix psychedelics with ritual magic work. I would point out that that's what every shaman on earth does. That's kind of the whole point. But it's also true that, at least in the beginning, you should limit yourself to things like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. I wouldn't be doing any goetic work with a head full of LSD, So 100 micrograms of LSD or something, moderate, half a eighth of mushrooms or whatever, will enhance and accelerate your development on this path. So I will give you guys a few minutes if anyone has questions or any subject that they would like me to talk about for a bit before I check out. But know that this is just the introduction to this. We're going to be talking about this subject an awful lot. And the original stories of how this happened to me in the first place are on my channel. Obviously, there's a video called The Phoenix Process that's a few years old that actually I captured a pretty remarkable moment that was kind of proof, of the reality of this stuff. And I was talking about 11:11 synchronicities, and when I said 11:11, it's exactly at the 11:11 minute marker, and it's a 30-minute video that was shot in 4 different locations out of sequence. So the chances of it randomly being hobbled together and that landing so perfectly was just great to see the universe help me, to assist me in making my point like that. There's another video where I say something about doing a meditation where you freeze an image in your mind and hold it. And as soon as I say that, the video glitched and my face freezes for like 10 seconds. So, not trying to boast, I'm just saying that that's the kind of confirmation that you need to track, and also assuring you that if you're successful at this stuff, you won't really have to work too hard to demonstrate it to people. And the only reason you should be demonstrating it is to encourage them to take their own steps. Because, ultimately, aside from the pursuit of living in our dreams and freeing ourselves from our ideas of limitation and the influence of past traumas and all of that stuff, a life where you are in a dialogue with the universal mind and you have these constant manifestations of improbability and magic, it is a much more fulfilling life. And it provides a kind of satisfaction that leads to a tranquility that reduces incidents of dissonance between people in our world. There are so many ways that this sort of elevation of consciousness results in a more harmonious experience for everyone. And, one of my fundamental motivations is that I hate how much opportunity I lost in my early life because of a lack of influence, not just in my family and in my own life, but in our culture in general. This disassociation that we have from what is actually our fundamental reality has set us adrift with a crisis of purpose that threatens to destroy the world and everyone in it. Do I believe in gematria or follow it? That was absolutely a part of this process. And, it's a difficult thing because if you consider how arbitrary it is to assign numbers to words and then to discount coincidence when they have correlations, it's a bit nutty. But I'll tell you about something that happened that really does a good job of validating gematria. I had chronic fatigue syndrome my entire life. I still really do. And the first gram of DMT I got, at one point, I piled a bunch of it in a pipe and smoked a ton of it, and I went rising through the plains until I hit like the highest possible level, and it was that like nirvana state where there was like no desire, no time, just infinite nothingness. And then as soon as I realized what had happened, I descended back into the body because that's what happens if you think you're done. So my roommate had discovered a gematria calculator online, and you could punch stuff into it, and it had a database. So if there was anything in the database with the same numerical value, it would pop up. And so this was very early on in the existence of this database. So I put in N,N-dimethyltryptamine, and the only phrase, my symptoms disappeared. I'm sorry, that's an integral part of that. So I noticed immediately when I came back into my body that I had no more symptoms of chronic fatigue. So I got up and went to the computer, punched in N,N-dimethyltryptamine, and the only phrase in the database that had the same numerical value was cure for chronic fatigue syndrome. So, I'd like to see the probability of that happening by chance calculated by someone. Thoughts on Enochian magic? Enochian magic is actually one of the most compelling manifestations of the magical tradition in terms of being able to provide proof. It's something that I personally haven't really dabbled with much because it doesn't really interest me. I don't really see any point in it. And it's also supposed to be really dangerous. But the thing that really gets me about it is that John Dee and Edward Kelly were, at least John Dee, was very highly educated for the time. This was the court astrologer and magician to, I think it was Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth or something. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider joining my Patreon. I'm demonetized, so I get no money from YouTube for this. And if you join our Patreon, you can take part in our... looks like speaking of patrons, looks like I just lost one. Anyways, you can take part in our weekly Forbidden Knowledge streams and also our voice chats where we have patrons at the $10 tier and higher all joined together in a round table discussion, and they've been really, really interesting so far and bigger every week. So, okay, but what I was saying about Enochian magic is that it has been studied by modern linguistic scholars, and it does have its own grammar and syntax. And I have a hard time believing that John Dee and Edward Kelly would have been capable of devising something like that. It's also said by a lot of adepts of the Western mystery tradition that if you know someone that doesn't believe in magic, just tell them to learn an Enochian call, and they will believe right away. But it's also said that almost immediately all kinds of bad shit happens in your life. My guess is that if it's true and it's real, and you're actually really, really advanced, and you do it properly with a proper banishing afterwards, that probably won't happen. But yeah, so I can't speak from personal experience, but I have studied it enough to know that it's definitely interesting, if not definitive, in terms of the veracity of it. Also, Danny Carey is a very down-to-earth person, and he seems pretty convinced. In fact, there's a track on Tool's, I think it's Anima, where this guy called into the George Norrie Coast to Coast radio show, and he claimed to be an employee at Area 51, and that what we think are aliens are actually interdimensional beings that were contacted during an earlier precursor to NASA, which could have been a reference to Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons' Paris working. Jack Parson was an early NASA rocket scientist, and they opened a portal and they drew this being that came through, and it looks just like a gray alien. So it does seem to connect to that, possibly. And in the middle of the conversation, and he also, this was before Katrina and, the big Indonesian tidal waves and whatnot. He said that the government knows that there's going to be these natural disasters, but they're not going to move people because they actually want to reduce the population. And, that was I don't know, what was that, 30 years ago or so? And that track is called Faip Deod, which is Enochian. And if you are curious about proper pronunciation of Enochian, there are like 3 recordings of Aleister Crowley speaking Enochian on YouTube. Okay, so I'm not seeing really many questions in the chat. It's been about an hour, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But I appreciate each and every one of you, and keep your eyes out for part 2, part 3. And, this is an ongoing process. I plan to drink a fairly large dose of San Pedro, Peruvian torch, up high in the peaks in a few days on my birthday. I'm turning 45 on Thursday. So going up into the peaks to drink San Pedro, and then at the end I'm going to have Yopo, and I have a strong feeling that that'll leave me with plenty to talk about after the fact. So again, I appreciate all you guys. Consider becoming a patron. We really appreciate your support. You can get blocks of time to video call and access to 5 years worth of patron-only material and our private voice chats once a week, and on and on. So really do appreciate each and every one of you, and best of luck on this journey, because I pretty well convinced that it is going to accelerate and amplify exponentially over the coming weeks and months, and we're going to be dealing with our own personal version of this process while we watch the macro world do the same thing. So as it always has been, and as it always will be, it will be equal parts promise and threat. And so our task is going to be to remain centered and focused and determined and undeterred, regardless of what is coming down the pipes, and resisting our programming and the temptation to allow the overlords to divide us, and all of that sort of stuff. And if you follow my channel, I'm going to be doing everything I can to provide whatever advice and guidance and support and personal experiences that I possibly can to aid and abet all of you motherfuckers at succeeding in this task, this alchemical transformation. So I will see you guys again very soon.